Chapter 12:33. The tens of thousands of treasures in the treasure pool were accumulated over countless years. It could be foreseen that there would only be more and more treasures here. This was because there were many people who participated in the gamble, but not many people could win in the end. As a result, it created a situation where more people entered than left. The experts in the treasure pool were used to the dense light of treasures. After all, many of them had seen it more than once. On the other hand, the divine ocean realm cultivators who came to the reincarnation tree with their elders but were not qualified to participate in the battle of the divine ocean realm. They were simply here to broaden their horizons. A female cultivator who had not seen much of the world covered her mouth and exclaimed, "There are so many good things. If we could sell them, how many spirit jades would they fetch?" A senior brother beside her smiled and said, "Junior sister, you may not know this, but the value of the treasures in the treasure pool can be determined by the number of starlight. Look carefully at those treasures. Do you see that each of them has a different number of starlight?" The female cultivator looked and nodded. "Yes, there are some with 1 starlight, 2 starlight, and 3 starlight. This is Old Shoe's classification of treasures. It is a little different from the orthodox classification in the cultivation world, but it is not far off. Those with 1 starlight are 1-star treasures, those with 2 starlight are 2-star treasures, and so on. A 1-star treasure is worth about 10,000 spirit jades. A 2-star treasure is 3 times the value of a 1-star treasure, and a 3-star treasure is 3 times the value of a 1-star treasure." The female cultivator exclaimed, "Then wouldn't a 3-star treasure be worth 90,000 spirit jades?" "Theoretically, that is correct." The male cultivator nodded. The female cultivator looked carefully for a moment and said excitedly, senior brother, look, there are 4-star treasures in there." There were indeed 4-star treasures, but there were not many of them. In this treasure pool with tens of thousands of treasures, one would not be able to find them if one did not look carefully. The female cultivator counted the price of the 4-star treasures with her fingers and finally came up with a number that made her speechless. They were only from ordinary large realms and had long heard of the difficulties of the experts who came out of the starry sky to search for spirit jades. However, this was a necessary resource for cultivators above the constellation realm. Every cultivator who entered the starry sky would have such an experience. Looking at it now, the price of a 4-star treasure here was likely enough to make the experts of this domain toil bitterly for hundreds of years. And to be able to take out a 4-star treasure as a wager, it was likely that only the powerhouses of the top-level domains would be able to do so. As the two of them spoke, the Sunshine Realm cultivator who had spoken first took out a treasure. He smiled and said, "Since the gambling is about to begin, this old man will throw out a brick to attract the jade. Everyone, please make yourselves at home." As he spoke, an ancient inkstone appeared in his hand, and he directly tossed it into the pool. Once the ancient inkstone entered the treasure pool, specks of starlight appeared on the inkstone's body. Shockingly, there were as many as 4 specks, causing many people to exclaim in surprise. That female cultivator also exclaimed in surprise, "Senior apprentice brother, it's another 4-star treasure." The male cultivator nodded. The first to make a move will naturally not be too shabby. Powerful cultivators like them are always concerned about their reputation. Furthermore, this person should be a senior from the Yellow Dragon realm. The Yellow Dragon realm has always considered itself to be the center of the starry sky. It is also the most powerful realm under the control of the human race. The female cultivator nodded her head thoughtfully. Loud laughter rang out. "Fellow Taoist Feng is truly generous. You've already taken out a 4-star treasure. This old man cannot compare to you. My pockets are too shabby, so I can only make a move." As the laughter rang out, another treasure fell into the treasure pool. It shone with 3-star light. Following that, different treasures flew into the treasure pool from all directions. Starlight shone brightly for a moment. However, most of them were 2-star treasures. There were very few 3-star treasures. As for the 4-star treasures, there was only one from the very beginning. To most of the powerhouses who had come here, participating in this gamble was just to relieve their boredom. They didn't really have to win anything, so naturally, they wouldn't place too much bets. After all, at their level of cultivation, even if they won something, it wouldn't be of much use. On the contrary, if they lost, it would be a loss. Of course, nothing was absolute. There were also those who came here with the mindset of winning. After all, if they really won, they would be able to obtain many benefits. Everyone could see the characteristics of the treasures through the treasure pool. They could also clearly see which Divine Sea Realm cultivator the treasure's owner had bet on. For example, the Sunshine Realm cultivator from the Yellow Dragon Realm had bet on a junior from the Yellow Dragon Realm. With his status, he couldn't possibly bet on someone else. Gradually, the number of treasures that fell into the treasure pool decreased. Those who had the intention to participate had basically all joined in. Until a certain moment, a seemingly inconspicuous bead flew into the treasure pool from somewhere in the crowd. In an instant, the dense flowing light fluctuated, and wherever the bead passed, all the treasures retreated one after another as if they had a mind of their own. This strange phenomenon shocked everyone. They didn't know what was going on. When he fixed his eyes on it, he was greatly shocked. It was because on that seemingly inconspicuous bead, 1, 2, 3, a total of 9 starlight dots were emitted. Even the most knowledgeable powerhouses couldn't help but widen their eyes, not to mention the Divine Sea Realm cultivators who had been watching the show. They immediately cried out in surprise. In the huge treasure pool, there were tens of thousands of treasures. There were only a few 4-star treasures. The sudden appearance of a 9-star treasure was a huge visual impact. If the treasure pool was a pond, and the treasures in it were just some fishes and shrimps swimming in it, then the sudden appearance of the bead was like a big shark that had broken into the pond. In the blink of an eye, 2 inconceivable thoughts appeared in everyone's minds. What is this thing? Who bet on it? No one suspected that the reincarnation tree had made a mistake. As a starry sky treasure, it couldn't be wrong about the value of a treasure. Since it had marked 9 stars, then it must be 9 stars. At the same time, the reincarnation tree's voice sounded in Yang Qing's ears. Dragon Monarch, this bet is just for fun. Why do you have to do this? Yang Qing responded with a lazy posture. I've been a little poor recently, and I'm in urgent need of a lot of materials. This is the only thing I can take out, so I have to bet it. Old Shu, can you lend me a few good things? I'll return them to you when I have more money. This was the real reason he had brought Lu Yi here. Of course, it was also the right time. If it weren't for this, he wouldn't have been able to bring Lu Yi here even if he wanted to. After being sealed for 10,000 years, he urgently needed a lot of resources to restore himself. If he only relied on himself to search the starry sky, he didn't know how much time he would have to waste. Here was a ready-made opportunity to make a fortune. It could be said that with the 9-star quality of the pearl, if Yang Qing won the bet, the treasures in the treasure pool would be reduced by a few % in an instant. At that time, he could find a place to casually sell it, and he would have enough resources to recover. Hearing this, the reincarnation tree fell silent. Could a dragon race return what they borrowed? It could only listen to these words. Moreover, it had nothing to lend. Although there were many treasures in the treasure pool, strictly speaking, they didn't belong to it. Instead, they were shared by all the races in the starry sky and were only kept by it for safekeeping. Dragon Monarch, this old man asks you to reconsider. This thing is very important and cannot be lost. Yang Qing said impatiently, I'll take care of my own things. Old man, don't worry about it. The reincarnation tree sighed. Of course it knew what Yang Qing was planning. If he won, he would definitely make a fortune. If he lost, with so many powerhouses present, who would have the ability to take this thing away from him? This dragon race would definitely act shamelessly when the time came. At that time, as the symbol of fairness and justice, would it step forward to uphold justice? If it stepped forward, it would only offend Yang Qing. If it didn't step forward, it would lose all its prestige. It could be said that the dragon race's precious treasure had given it a big problem. But on second thought, even if Yang Qing lost, it seemed that no one had the right to take this bead away from the treasure pool. This was because if they wanted to take it away, they would have to stake something of equal value. Now, apart from this bead, the greatest bargaining chip was a 4-star treasure from the Yellow Dragon realm. Even if there were hundreds of other treasures, they still wouldn't be able to match the value of this bead. So Yang Qing had nothing to fear. Once the value of his bargaining chip reached a certain level, no one would be able to take it away. Even if he bet this bead, even if he lost, the bead would only be left in the treasure pool. The reincarnation tree could almost foresee what Yang Qing would do when the time came. He would definitely borrow the bead from it. This guy was here to make a no-cost deal this time. After seeing through Yang Qing's intentions, the reincarnation tree stopped trying to dissuade him. On the other side, there were already some knowledgeable powerhouses who vaguely recognized the true appearance of the bead. It looks like the legendary dragon bead. In the starry sky, there were many treasures similar to this bead. However, only a dragon bead could be so valuable. As soon as this thought appeared, many of the powerhouses present broke out in cold sweat. To be able to take out a dragon bead as a wager, didn't that mean that he was a member of the dragon race? Or perhaps he had once slain a true dragon. No matter what, he wasn't someone they could afford to offend. Although Yang Qing originally had an extraordinary bearing, which of the powerhouses here could be lacking in bearing? He was mixed in with the crowd and just stood there. However, as soon as the item that looked like a dragon bead was taken out, he immediately became the focus of everyone present. Many people around him all left without leaving a trace. Just like the dragon bead in the treasure pool, the dragon bead was alone in the center of the pool. Many other treasures floated around it, like stars surrounding the moon. No one dared to do anything. Just as the reincarnation tree had thought, when the value of a certain item reached a certain level, it would be absolutely safe. This was because no one had the ability to place a bet of equal value, so there was no possibility of it being taken away. However, there was still one thing that made everyone curious. Which divine sea realm cultivator was the owner of this treasure that looked like a dragon bead betting on? Generally speaking, everyone would bet on a junior from their own realm. There were few exceptions. Those who came here were all prideful. They wouldn't go so far as to bet on a junior from another realm for the sake of winning or losing. They wouldn't boost the morale of others and undermine their own prestige. After a careful look, the dragon bead revealed the information of the wager. Realm of 9 heavens, Louis. The crowd was in an uproar. End of chapter. Chapter 1234. A vast and ancient aura lingered around him, as if he was in the ancient starry sky. This was the first feeling Lu Yi had after breaking through the door. He understood that he was already in the Alpha Origin realm. According to Yang Qing, this was the ancestral land where the reincarnation tree was born. It was also a land that belonged to the barbaric era. The reincarnation tree had integrated it into itself and retained its original appearance. Therefore, compared to other domains in the starry sky, this place had all kinds of incredible abilities. The biggest characteristic was that magical spirit energy would be born every 100 years, which could transform a cultivator's body and give them the power to connect with the starry sky. This was the key to the Divine Sea Realm's advancement to the Constellation Realm. Lu Yi didn't know exactly how big the Alpha Origin Realm was, but it couldn't be small. It could be regarded as a domain. 2,000 or 3,000 people wasn't a small number, but if scattered into a domain, it would be a little inconspicuous. The moment he appeared in the Alpha Origin Realm, he activated his power to protect his body and vigilantly scanned his surroundings. If not for Yang Qing's previous instructions, he would have immediately activated the concealment and aura-concealing spirit runes to conceal his existence. But since he had an agreement with Yang Qing, it wasn't good to keep a low profile. Not only was it not good to keep a low profile, but he also had to show off. There was a ranking in the Divine Sea battle, and the key to the ranking was one's harvest. In his opinion, in the early stages, the many monsters from the various domains should have formed their own formations. This was because the Alpha Origin Realm was too large and difficult to gather. Secondly, everyone needed to harvest. If they really joined forces, who would the harvest belong to? Moreover, they were all top monsters of their respective domains, people who led an era. Who wouldn't have confidence in themselves? If they thought of a way to join forces with others from the beginning, it would only weaken their momentum for no reason. It should only be in the later stages, as the Alpha origin realm shrank and more cultivators began to gather together, that there would be a situation where all sides joined forces. The several major races undoubtedly had an advantage in such a battle because there was a natural possibility of joining forces between the same races. For example, the human race, the demon race, the insect race. Of course, those domains that were on good terms with each other and had connections with each other were natural allies. In this regard, the 9 prefectures had no advantage. Although the 9 prefectures were now connected to the starry sky again, it was still in a state of dormancy. Even constellation experts couldn't casually announce the name of the 9 prefectures. Of course, Lu Yi wasn't stupid enough to think that all humans could be trusted. Almost 40% of the cultivators who participated in the battle for the Divine Sea were humans, but only 100 of them emerged victorious. Thus, even though they were all humans, there were still many conflicts between them. In such an environment, there was only one way to persevere. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will emerge victorious. Lu Ye's divine sense spread out, scanning the surroundings. In the next moment, he felt another divine sense coming from a different direction. The 2 divine senses clashed and retracted. Lu Yi immediately leaped up and rushed in that direction. Since they were going to compete, he would go all out. He never imagined that his luck would be so good that someone would appear so close to him in the Alpha origin stage. He didn't know which race it was. What if it was a human? After all, there was no deep enmity between them. They were only here to fight for the opportunity. Perhaps they could only fight and force them to back off. Knocking his opponent out of the Alpha origin stage was also considered a victory. Hence, there was no need to fight to the death. After making up his mind, Lu Yi soon sensed an aura approaching from the front. Like Lu Yi, the other party had come to him, clearly wanting to get off to a good start. When Lu Yi focused his vision on the other side, a look of joy appeared on his opponent's face. Lu Yi felt lucky to have met an opponent as soon as he reached the Alpha origin stage. His opponent also felt lucky because the cultivation displayed by his opponent was only at the 8th order Divine Sea realm. He never thought that an 8th order Divine Sea realm cultivator would participate in such an opportunity. However, since his opponent dared to come, he must have something to rely on. Perhaps his strength wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface, and he could kill enemies above his realm. However, which of the geniuses from the various great domains here wasn't in existence that could kill enemies above their realm? First layer. The gap in cultivation was destined to never be erased. As the distance closed, both sides could clearly see each other's appearance. Lu Ye's human features were very obvious, and from his attire, he was an artifact cultivator. This made the newcomer even more happy because his race was best at dealing with human artifact cultivators and body cultivators. On the contrary, it would be quite troublesome for him to deal with a human artifact cultivator. Lu Yi was also happy because his opponent had a pair of pointed ears, blood-red skin, and a tall and slender figure. If his opponent was a human, Lu Yi would have to consider whether or not to kill, but since his opponent was a blood race cultivator, there was no need to consider anything. When he was only 1,000 meters away from his opponent, Lu Yi suddenly came to a stop and politely cupped his fists. Lu Yi of the 9 Heavens greets fellow Taoist. The blood race cultivator was taken aback. He hadn't come here to greet Lu Yi. Without stopping, a blood-red light flashed behind him as he grinned. "I'm afraid it's too late to beg for mercy now." The blood river surged into the sky, turning into a huge wave that engulfed Lu Yi, who was standing motionless in place. The next moment, Lu Yi, who was floating in the blood river, was attacked by the blood race cultivator like a hurricane. For a moment, he was in an extremely difficult situation. Never fight with a blood race cultivator in the blood sea. This was a common understanding among all the starry sky races because once they fell into the blood sea, their strength would be suppressed. On the other hand, the blood race cultivator was like a fish in water. Under such circumstances, even if one was slightly stronger than the blood race, they were likely to be defeated. The blood race cultivator didn't know why Lu Yi looked so stupid and didn't even try to avoid his blood river. At first, he was a little cautious, thinking that there might be something special about this person, but after fighting for a while, he was shocked to find that there was nothing special about this guy. Lu Yi was indeed strong. An ordinary 8th Order Divine Sea cultivator wouldn't be able to last too long under his frenzied attacks, but although this person was in a difficult situation, he was still able to hold on. In the midst of the fierce battle, Lu Ye's voice sounded again. "Fellow Taoist, your soul has returned to this place, so you should at least let me know who killed you, right? Has he accepted his fate?" The blood race cultivator was overjoyed and his attacks didn't slow down. His voice floated from all directions of the blood river. "Bloodly world, Zhou Fang, if you meet me in your next life, remember to stay away." Lu Yi nodded lightly. "Many thanks for telling me, fellow Taoist." He waved the long saber in his hand and changed the topic. "Please go on your way, fellow Taoist." "What?" Zhou Fang couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, his eyes widened as he perceived an extremely shocking scene. In his blood river, a sea of blood spread out and quickly wrapped around his blood river. In terms of size, his blood river couldn't compare at all. What frightened him even more was that an extremely terrifying aura came from the blood sea, causing his soul to tremble and his body to tremble. He was very familiar with this feeling. It was clearly the suppression of the blood race's saint attribute. "You're a blood race cultivator?" Zhou Fang cried out in shock. Only the blood kindred could perform such a pure blood river technique. Only the blood kindred could possess such a divine nature. To be honest, he had never seen such a strong and viscous divine nature in his life. Even the blood kindred elder with the strongest divine nature in the bloodly realm could not be compared to it. But if he was a blood race, why did he look like a human? Why didn't he reveal his identity in the beginning? He couldn't understand. When the saint attribute began to suppress him, Zhou Fang became a weakling and his strength instantly plummeted. Just now, he recklessly attacked Lu Yi in close quarters. The mountain saber slashed out a saber light and cut through Zhou Fang's neck like cutting tofu. His body immediately stiffened. The blood sea disappeared, and Zhou Fang's body fell from midair. Lu Yi sheathed the mountain saber and chased after the other's body. After killing the enemy, he naturally had to search the body. He might not gain anything, but he had to go through the process. This victory was very easy, all thanks to the suppression of the saint attribute. Lu Yi didn't expect that his crazy refining of the saint blood in the blood refining world would set the stage for today's battle. Now, it seemed that any blood race would be suppressed by the saint attribute. He didn't know where this bloodly world was, but it must have some connection with the blood refining world. Could it be a world formed from the other parts of the huge female creature? The blood refinement realm was the female creature's torso, head, and limbs. Judging from Lu Ye's battle with the blood spirit in the blood refinement realm, the female creature might not have only 4 limbs. She might have 6, or even 8. If each of these parts could be turned into a world, then the number of worlds controlled by the blood race was not small, and they seemed to be invading other worlds. There seemed to be a number of blood race participating in the Divine Sea battle this time, but he didn't know how many there were. Perhaps he could do something with them. After a short while, Lu Yi finished searching the corpse and only obtained a storage bag. He burned Zhou Fang's body clean with fire, then rushed forward in a certain direction. He didn't try to hide anything and simply flew through the air openly, his 8th Order Divine Sea cultivation clearly visible to everyone. Just as Lu Yi thought, the Alpha Origin realm was very large, and this was only the beginning, so there weren't many opportunities for the geniuses of various worlds to meet. But there were always exceptions, such as Lu Yi and Zhou Fangxi, and some other places. When the geniuses of these places met, regardless of race, they would basically fight. For any cultivator who came here, everyone else was a stepping stone for them to climb up, so unless they already knew each other or were on good terms with their respective worlds, there was no possibility of peaceful coexistence. After one battle after another, in less than half an hour since the Alpha Origin realm began, several people had been eliminated. Those who didn't withdraw voluntarily died on the spot. Chapter 12:35. Although many of the Divine Sea Realm geniuses were 9th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivators, because of their different origins, their backgrounds were also quite different. Perhaps they were the strongest existences in their respective realms, But when compared to the geniuses of other realms in the vast starry sky, the disparity was obvious. In a battle in the Alpha Origin realm, if two sides of similar strength encountered each other, it would be difficult to determine life and death. As a result, both sides would inevitably choose to give up in a tacit understanding to avoid a fight between two sides that would only benefit others. Therefore, in the early stages of the battle for the Divine Sea realm, as long as there was a winner, there would also be a battle of life and death. The names of the eliminated geniuses from other realms also faded away on the golden pillar to the left of the gate. The masters and seniors who were paying attention to the changes here couldn't help but sigh. In their hearts, they didn't feel that their juniors were any worse than others, but they still had expectations in their hearts. Just like in a mortal family, no parent would feel that their child was worse than their neighbor's child. But now, it seemed that they were still deceiving themselves. In the Alpha Origin realm, Lu Yi got off to a good start. He killed people, looted their corpses, and destroyed their corpses in one go before swaggering away. He flew foolishly for half a day, but didn't even encounter a single shadow. With his current leg strength, even if he was just flying leisurely, half a day's time was not short. But he still didn't find anything. Now, he could confirm that the Alpha Origin realm was indeed very large, so the thousands of people who entered were scattered all over the place. Unless one's luck was particularly good, it would be very difficult to meet others in the early stages. There was no good way to attract the attention of others in a short period of time, so he could only let nature take its course. However, he could still slightly improve the efficiency of his search. Thinking so, Lu Yi landed, found a hidden place, and urged the power of his talent tree to condense his clone. He then put the Scarlet Dragon battle robe on his clone and equipped it with the sword gourd. Li Tai Bai, the sword cultivator, had appeared out of nowhere. He didn't change his clone's appearance. He had no choice in the 9 provinces, but there was no need to do so here. Among the 2,000 or 3,000 Divine Sea realm cultivators, who would recognize him? Compared to before, there was indeed no difference at first glance, but after the second transformation of the talent tree, the doppelganger had more abilities. At the very least, if the doppelganger's power was consumed, it could completely consume spirit pills to replenish itself like the main body. There was no need to worry about the problem of spiritual power being obscured and causing a decrease in strength. In the past, Lu Ye's clone had to rely on spirit stones to slowly recover. But now, he didn't have to worry about this. This undoubtedly meant his clone's Li Tai Bai. However, where there were gains, there were losses. In the past, the clone only had one root of the talent tree, but now, the talent tree had split into 2. If the clone died, Lu Ye's loss would be immeasurable. Sky, and his clone, Sky realm. In the current Alpha Origin realm, the geniuses of the various great domains were probably doing the same thing as him, searching for traces of others. As long as one's luck wasn't too bad, there would always be a harvest. I wonder what race it is this time. Lu Yi thought as he flew forward. Unsurprisingly, the other party didn't hesitate to greet him. No matter who it was, Lu Yi wouldn't be afraid because within a certain range, as long as he pushed his spirit chi, his cultivation couldn't be concealed. Of course, he could also use his pseudo-might spirit crests to disguise himself as a 9th-order Divine Sea realm cultivator. This wasn't difficult for him. But there was no point in doing so. When he got closer, Lu Yi discovered that he had run into a human race cultivator. This was normal. The human race was a big race and there were traces of them everywhere in the starry sky. The number of human race geniuses participating in the Divine Sea battle this time was quite large, so it would be strange if he didn't run into one. Since he didn't know the other party's background, Lu Yi wasn't interested in inquiring. The newcomer was a man in his early 20s, with a chubby figure and a slightly chubby face. He had a seemingly simple and honest smile on his face, and although he was young, his sleeves fluttered in the wind, giving him the appearance of an immortal. The appearance of an immortal. From afar, the fat man spoke. Fellow Taoist is only an 8th-order Divine Sea cultivator, yet you have come to participate in such a grand event. Your courage is commendable and admirable. Although he said so, there wasn't the slightest trace of admiration on his face, only excitement. As he flew, a treasure appeared above his head. It was a small pagoda-like spirit artifact. This pagoda-like spirit artifact was divided into 9 layers, each of which glowed with a colorful light. The light flowed down from the top of the pagoda and finally fell on the man's body, forming a dazzling protective barrier. When Lu Yi saw the other party's posture, he knew that he was a Dharma cultivator, because only Dharma cultivators would summon their spirit artifacts before a battle. The strength of a Dharma cultivator's foundation was closely related to their spirit artifacts, especially defensive ones, which were of the utmost importance. Moreover, the other party was an extremely experienced Dharma cultivator. He didn't underestimate Lu Yi just because he was only an 8th order cultivator, so he immediately summoned his defensive spirit artifact. This kind of person was generally not easy to deal with. After casting a protective barrier on himself, the fat Dharma cultivator raised his hand and a tattered fan appeared in his hand. At first glance, it looked like a fan that had been passed down for decades by some farmer family to relieve the summer heat, but it was obviously not an ordinary fan. The tattered fan had extremely complex patterns on both sides, like natural spirit veins. One side was blue and the other side was red, but it was unknown what they were. Lu Yi soon understood what this fan was for, because the fat Dharma cultivator gently waved his hand in his direction, and a number of wind blades suddenly formed and flew towards him. Not only were there many of them, but they were also extremely fast. Lu Yi hurriedly dodged. Before Shaochen could dodge all the wind blades, the fatty waved his hand again. Following closely behind the wind blades, huge fireballs blazed fiercely, as if they were meteors. Their might was terrifying. The fat Dharma cultivator waved his hand casually, but Lu Yi dodged awkwardly, making the scene extremely thrilling. Oh! Seeing that Lu Yi was in a difficult situation but still unscathed, the fat Dharma cultivator was obviously surprised, because it wasn't easy for an 8th order Divine Sea cultivator to reach this level. Fortunately, he had been cautious enough and never underestimated his enemy, otherwise he would have really suffered a setback. Although they had just fought, from Lu Ye's various reactions, the fat Dharma cultivator knew that this person's strength was not as simple as it seemed on the surface, otherwise, he wouldn't have been qualified to participate in the Divine Sea battle. Since he started cultivating, he had always adhered to a principle: no matter how weak the enemy was, he had to have the mentality of a lion going all out to catch a rabbit. This was also the reason why he could stand out in his own realm and follow his elders here. Unlike in the 9 provinces, Yang Qing brought Lu Yi to the reincarnation tree without even saying a word, and only after they arrived did she teach him all kinds of things about the reincarnation tree and the Alpha Origin realm. For example, in the domains that participated in the Divine Sea battle every 100 years, such people had to be selected through a series of battles. Generally, it was impossible for there to be only one sect in a realm. The monstrous geniuses of these sects had to first fight in their own realm to determine 1 or 2 of the strongest. Only then could they represent their realm and enter the reincarnation tree. In a sense, they represented the face of their realm, and if they weren't strong enough, they would only make a fool of themselves. The fat Dharma cultivator had always been a patient and careful person, and was always kind. It wasn't until this time's inner realm great competition that he revealed his edge and defeated several candidates that were favored by the elders of the inner realm. His goal was to come to the Alpha Origin realm and win one of the top 100 spots so that he could be promoted to a star mansion. If he said he had absolute confidence in breaking into the top 100, he would be deceiving himself and others. Those who could come here were all monsters, and they were bound to be stronger than him. Therefore, when he encountered an opponent weaker than him, he couldn't let them go, because this was related to his future ranking. The most taboo in cultivation was to be indecisive and kind to others, especially in the Alpha Origin realm. He wouldn't show mercy just because everyone was from the human race. Seeing that Lu Yi still had some strength left, the fat Dharma cultivator smiled slightly. Holding the fan in one hand, he unhurriedly waved it, sending wind blades and fireballs blotting out the sky, creating a lively scene. Then he steadied his body, made a hand seal with his other hand, and pointed at Lu Yi from afar. A thin bolt of lightning burst out, piercing through the air like a bolt of lightning, and shot straight towards Lu Yi. The reason he could defeat all his opponents in his realm and win a spot to participate in the Divine Sea battle wasn't because of the spirit treasures he displayed. The spirit treasures of Dharma cultivators had always been auxiliary, not decisive factors. He also had extremely deep attainments in the Tao of Dharma cultivation, which was his true foundation. Moreover, he cultivated lightning-type Dharma cultivation. Perhaps it wasn't as violent as fire-type Dharma cultivation, but it had always been known for its speed and lethality. This really caught Lu Yi off guard. Among all the Dharma cultivation techniques, lightning-type Dharma cultivation was the fastest, so fast that even he couldn't react in time. The moment he sensed danger, Lu Yi activated the defensive spirit rune, spreading it out layer by layer on his chest. With a boom, the defensive spirit rune broke through layer by layer, but it still wasn't enough. Lu Yi immediately felt his chest tighten, and when a violent force leaked out, he involuntarily retreated dozens of feet. During this time, he had to dodge an endless stream of wind blades and fireballs. It was an extremely difficult situation. In the cultivation world, Dharma cultivators and armament cultivators had always been two entangled factions, because the core concept of the struggle between these two factions was distance. If a Dharma cultivator pulled away, a Dharma cultivator would have 100 ways to toy with an armament cultivator. However, if an armament cultivator closed the distance, it was difficult to say whether a Dharma cultivator's weak body could withstand a few slashes. Therefore, Lu Yi had been closing in on his opponent from the very beginning. However, due to the interference of his opponent's treasured fan, the speed of his advance was very slow. Now that he had been struck by lightning, all his previous efforts had been in vain. Chapter 12:36. Seeing that Lu Yi was unharmed after receiving his lightning strike, the magic cultivator frowned slightly. He clearly saw that the weapon cultivator had done something the moment his lightning strike struck. He didn't know what the weapon cultivator did, but he condensed a thick layer of protection at the place where his lightning strike landed, which neutralized most of the lightning strike's power. This was the key. He didn't care too much. The battle had just begun. Since he had a slight advantage, he could quickly turn this advantage into victory. Seeing that the weapon cultivator was charging at him again, the magic cultivator calmly waved his magic fan, and the lightning strike spread out. Lu Yi dashed forward like a wolf, waving the long saber in his hand, slashing out blade after blade of light to meet the wind blades and fireballs. His figure moved freely, constantly approaching his opponent's direction. There were continuous explosions. That was the collision between the blade of light and the wind blades and fireballs. For a moment, the spiritual power was in chaos. However, every time he neared the magic cultivator, he would be struck by lightning without warning. The attack came from the front and blasted his body back, making all his efforts useless. The scene looked like Lu Yi was going against the tide of spells, but he was sent flying every time. The opponent's lightning strike was the key. Without the lightning strike, Lu Yi felt that he could completely break through the magic fan seal. As long as he closed in, the rhythm of the battle would be in his hands. However, how to deal with the lightning strike was really a headache. Lightning-type spells had always been known for their speed. By the time you saw it, it was already in front of you. There was no room for you to dodge in advance. Therefore, he could only attack the magic cultivator who used the lightning strike. Lightning-type spells were indeed very fast, but everything had its advantages and disadvantages. It was impossible to have all the advantages. Lightning-type spells had an unerasable disadvantage. That was, they were difficult to control. Unlike the wind blades and fireballs, when they were cast, the magic cultivator could control them. However, the power of the lightning strike, when cast 3 times, was a straight-line attack. Even the magic cultivator who cast the spell couldn't control it. In other words, this thing couldn't be turned. Lu Yi had encountered some magic cultivators who could cast lightning-type spells in Jianghu. Of course, their strength was inferior. In terms of spell attainment, they couldn't be compared to the fat magic cultivator in front of him, but the principle was the same. Therefore, as long as he found the right way, there would always be a way to deal with it. After advancing again and being repelled by the lightning strike, Lu Yi finally noticed some patterns. When the spell cultivator tried to use another lightning strike to push him back, he suddenly steadied his body and turned around. However, the lightning strike he expected did not come. A meaningful smile appeared on Lu Xiu's face. Just as Lu Ye's figure paused for a moment, lightning flashed out. Lu Yi thought that he had found a pattern, but in reality, the pattern he had found was only what the Dharma cultivator had told him to find. In other words, this was a trap that had been deliberately exposed. The lightning strike this time was stronger than all the previous ones. The energy contained in it was definitely not something that a few temporary defensive spirit runes could resist. Lu Yi was looking for the right way to deal with the magic cultivator's lightning strike, but the magic cultivator was also observing Lu Yi. He was confident that this lightning strike, which had been stored up for a long time, was enough to severely injure this magic cultivator. Next, it was time for him to reap the fruits of victory. An 8th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivator wasn't simple. It could be seen that he had a lot of combat experience, but he seemed to lack some experience in fighting against top-level masters. Although Lu Yi had fought a lot of battles along the way, his cultivation wasn't weak. Most of the people he encountered were on the same level. There were very few people who could exchange blows with him, and they were basically all he dealt with them swiftly and decisively. When the World-Roasted World Seed was used, a lot of strong people performed poorly under the suppression of the divine attribute. Strike 10 also got Jin Song Om. Although they were all powerful, that kind of training was different from a life-and-death battle. The growth of a cultivator wasn't invincible. It wasn't a bad thing to occasionally encounter some setbacks. From another point of view, it was precisely because of the accumulation of many setbacks that a cultivator could be invincible. Lu Yi himself was aware of this problem, so he naturally intended to make up for this shortcoming. The battle for the Spirit Sea at the Reincarnation Tree was a good opportunity. The top geniuses from several realms had gathered here, and each of them had extraordinary abilities. Moreover, there was plenty of time, so they could be his whetstone. Otherwise, he would have to be crazy to use such a stupid method to fight with a Dharma cultivator. In a situation where their abilities were similar, if he could not close the distance between him and the Dharma cultivator immediately, he should immediately escape and look for the next opportunity, instead of charging forward recklessly. But all the observations just now weren't meaningless, especially when faced with the threat of a power that could seriously injure him. Lu Ye's heart had a warning sign, so the moment the warning sign appeared, even though he didn't know what would happen, he instinctively moved his body. The thick thunderbolt brushed past his body and swept into the distance, exploding in the distance, leaving a dark mark in the void as the smell of burnt lake wafted into his nose. The smile on the magic cultivator's face turned into astonishment. He didn't expect Lu Yi to do this. What he could be sure of was that there was nothing wrong with his plan. During the Great Realm Trial, he had taken down the strongest opponent in this way. There was no problem with his plan, but he didn't succeed in the end. In the end, there was only one reason. The magic cultivator had the instinctive premonition of the people of the eastern region, so he was able to attack at the same time. He was able to dodge and prevent the magic cultivator's thunderbolt from succeeding. Amazing! The magic cultivator was secretly amazed. Such an opponent could no longer be measured by an 8th order. This was a master whose strength was completely equal to his. The magic cultivator was a little distressed. To be honest, he thought he could pinch a soft persimmon, but he didn't expect to kick an iron plate. The battle for the Spirit Sea had just begun, so it wasn't wise to compete with such a master. If he consumed too much energy, it would be detrimental to his subsequent actions. But at this point, there was no way out for both sides. They couldn't just call it quits. The magic cultivator was determined. This was the first opponent he had encountered. If he couldn't deal with him, what was the point of talking about the future? No matter what, he had to kill him. The fierce battle continued, and the magic cultivator soon found something wrong. The magic cultivator's perception of lightning strikes seemed to be getting sharper. Previously, every time he struck, his opponent could only be forced to use his defensive power to resist. But after that perfect dodge, his opponent seemed to have noticed something. Now, he was able to dodge almost half of the lightning strikes in advance. The magic cultivator couldn't help but sigh. Thunder attribute spells were indeed untraceable. Once they were cast, there was a flaw. Smart people wouldn't target the lightning-type spell. They would only target the person who cast the spell. He had hidden it very well before, even taking the initiative to betray another person to hide his real flaw. But the magic cultivator's perception was too strong, and his eyes were too sharp. He had already noticed it. This was the reason why he could avoid it in advance. If this continued, the situation would only get worse. The situation was indeed getting worse for the magic cultivator. Because the lightning strikes couldn't be used every time, this made it easier for Lu Yi to advance. In the beginning of the battle, the magic cultivator had been standing in the same spot calmly. But now, he was being forced to retreat continuously. He had to retreat. If he didn't, the magic cultivator would soon be riding on his face. But he still had no intention of stopping, because his strongest killing move was in the midst of brewing. Once it was formed, it wouldn't be a matter of victory or defeat, but of life and death. Now that the situation had developed to this point, he could only stake everything on one throw. Before the magic cultivator broke through his spell seal and reached him, he had to properly brew his strongest killing move. For this reason, he had no choice but to speed up the casting of the lightning strike spell. Originally, he shouldn't have done this, because it would be too easy to expose the flaw in his casting of the thunder attribute spell. But since his opponent had already seen through it, there was no need to hide. He might as well use it openly. There was only one result. Lu Yi had managed to avoid all of the lightning strikes. But he wasn't happy at all. Because as his opponent continued to cast the thunder attribute spell, a huge sense of danger enveloped him. At first, it wasn't clear, but as time passed, it became more and more intense. It was as if a sharp sword was hanging above his head. Soon, he discovered the problem. That was, for some reason, there were traces of lightning energy lingering around him. No matter how he moved, he couldn't get rid of it. Moreover, the lightning energy was constantly growing stronger as the magic cultivator cast his spells. It looked like it could explode at any time. Lu Ye's heart couldn't help but tremble. If the lightning energy exploded, it would be equivalent to falling into a pool of lightning. By then, even with his strong physique, he would be severely injured. This fat magic cultivator had too many tricks up his sleeve. He thought he had already defeated him, but who knew that he would cause such a mess? But this also opened his eyes. If he encountered such an enemy in the future, he would be able to prepare in advance. In this current situation, he actually had a choice. He could end the battle quickly. This was a method he had prepared to deal with the magic cultivator. But if he really did that, he might force his opponent to activate the power of the lightning pool in advance. This was because he couldn't get rid of the lightning energy lingering around him. These things were like ancient maggots, tightly surrounding him. He could only endure for now and numb his opponent. On the surface, his attacks were even fiercer, as if he couldn't wait to kill his opponent. The distance between them was rapidly closing. When the magic cultivator's lightning strikes couldn't cause much obstruction to Lu Yi, the outcome was already decided. Chapter 1237. The fat spell cultivator couldn't help but sigh. He wanted to wait the while longer before activating his trump card. That way, his methods would be stronger and more reliable. But the weapon cultivator had obviously sensed it. If he delayed any longer, the situation would be difficult to predict. He had to activate it in advance. Once he made up his mind, the power of thunder around the fat spell cultivator suddenly surged. At the same time, Lu Ye's sense of danger increased sharply. His skin felt numb all over. That was a sign that the thunder pool around him was about to explode. The Dharma cultivator no longer retreated. He stood still, took out a Dharma seal, and smiled at Lu Yi, who was pouncing towards him. Fellow Taoist, your strength is impressive, but this is a fight for an opportunity. It has nothing to do with personal grudges. Please understand. All right. They were all from different realms and had never met before. Naturally, there was no grudge between them. So, he was right. This was a fight for an opportunity. In front of the biggest opportunity of the Divine Sea realm, no one would hold back. At this moment, the spell cultivator revealed his true intentions. If things went as expected, the weapon cultivator would be seriously injured or even killed in the next moment. But he suddenly felt uneasy. Because the weapon cultivator was clearly in a desperate situation, but his expression had calmed down. This was somewhat abnormal. Then he saw a stream of light shoot out from the weapon cultivator's waist and hit him. This was a weapon cultivator? The spell cultivator couldn't help but laugh. What kind of cultivation was this? Using a weapon cultivator? When weapon cultivators and body cultivators were not strong enough, they used a weapon cultivator to make up for their lack of attack range. It was very popular among low-level cultivators. Because of their low cultivation, weapon cultivators and body cultivators didn't have long-range attacks. But as the cultivator's cultivation increased, this kind of thing was basically eliminated. It wasn't that it didn't have the ability to kill. It was just that weapon cultivators and body cultivators were more willing to trust their weapons and fists. This way they could unleash their greatest power. Using a weapon cultivator was just icing on the cake. Was he at his wit's end? So after knowing that he couldn't close the distance, he used a weapon cultivator to attack? Thinking this, the spell cultivator had no intention of underestimating the weapon cultivator. His opponent this time was very strong. He couldn't be sure that he wouldn't do something to the weapon. It was better not to get involved. With a tilt of his body, the flowing light of the imperial equipment brushed past him. At the same time, the power of thunder that had been lingering around Lu Ye's body suddenly shone brightly, turning the area around him into a pool of lightning. This was the spell cultivator's trump card. Even though he had to activate it in advance due to the development of the situation, its power was not to be underestimated. It was not something a cultivator of the spiritual ocean realm could casually defend against. This time, even if the weapon cultivator did not die, he would be seriously injured. The Dharma cultivator raised the fan in his hand and activated his spiritual power. He focused his attention on the front and prepared to deal the final blow. However, at this moment, there was a strange aura behind him. The magic cultivator's hair stood on end. When he hurriedly turned his head, he was shocked to find that the weapon cultivator who was supposed to be in the lightning pool had somehow appeared behind him. This was something that was simply impossible to happen. He had no idea how the other party did it. Meeting the other party's calm gaze, the cultivator knew that this time, he was probably done for. As the Pan Mountain blade was raised high, a dense blood-red light exploded behind Lu Yi, spreading out into a sea of blood. As the Pan Mountain blade slashed down, the sea of blood also rolled back. At such a close distance, the spell cultivator had no room to dodge. When the heavy blade landed on his body, he immediately felt as if he had been hit by a mountain. His fat body involuntarily fell down. Thankfully, he had been careful and activated the power of the pagoda to protect himself. Otherwise, this blade alone would have been enough to split him in half. Although the pagoda's light blocked the attack, the ferocious power couldn't be dispelled. When the spell cultivator's body fell, he felt his organs shift and his chi and blood churn. Before he could stabilize himself, he was already surrounded by the sea of blood and fell into a sticky tree. Blood art? Spell cultivator? This did not make sense. He was clearly a weapon cultivator of the human race. How could he use the blood art? This guy? Did he cultivate both the art of war? He did not think that Lu Yi was a vampire. The characteristics of vampires were very obvious. They were completely different from humans. Humans also cultivated blood arts, so he thought that Lu Yi cultivated both the art of war and the art of war. What kind of monstrous talent was this? Just based on the blood art that the other party used, it seemed to be more exquisite and magnificent than a real vampire's. What greeted him was a second slash. His body tumbled in the blood sea, unable to stop at all. Falling into the blood sea and suffering a sneak attack from Lu Yi, even if he was a well-deserved genius of this domain, he would not be able to make any waves at this moment. Real battles were always so dangerous. The side that clearly had a great advantage could be defeated and killed in the blink of an eye. But he really did not understand how the weapon cultivator had suddenly appeared behind him. He should have been in his own lightning pool. However, he soon realized where the problem lay. Before the lightning pool exploded, the weapon cultivator had shot a weapon at him. Because he was cautious, he did not make contact with the weapon and let it fly behind him. Now that he thought about it, the weapon cultivator appeared where the weapon cultivator was. He had the means to change directions with the weapon cultivator? What kind of ability was this? He had to admit that the law cultivator's thinking was a bit off. Lu Ye's method was not to change positions with the weapon cultivator. Instead, he used the power of the void spirit pattern to teleport to the weapon cultivator's location. 3 just before the power of the lightning pool exploded. He could not do it too early. The accumulating power of lightning kept circling around him, and he could not get rid of it. It followed him wherever he went. If he used this method too early, it would only alert the law cultivator. He could not do it too late. If he was late, he would really be enveloped by the lightning pool. He could only teleport out when the lightning pool exploded. Not only could he avoid the lightning pool's power, but he could also catch the enemy off guard. In fact, Lu Yi could have done this from the beginning. Ever since the second transformation of his talent tree and the void spirit pattern on the leaves of his talent tree, he was no longer afraid of being attacked from a distance. He could use the void spirit pattern to teleport to the enemy's side anytime and anywhere. With the help of the Blood Sea technique, he could be said to be invincible in a battle at the Divine Sea Realm. Otherwise, with his Divine Sea Realm cultivation, why would he carry a weapon casket with him? Why would he use the weapon cultivator technique on the enemy? Instead of using the weapon cultivator technique, he might as well use a few more blade auras. They might be more powerful. The weapon cultivator technique was just a cover. Lu Ye's real purpose was to build the void spirit pattern on the weapon. This was a unique tactic that belonged to him. It was an extremely flexible tactic. In the insect realm, he used this method to sneak attack Yenya. Now, it was the Fat Law Cultivator's turn. In the Blood Sea, the Law Cultivator was still struggling, but it was destined to be futile. The sticky binding of the Blood Sea greatly reduced his speed. If he could not escape from the Blood Sea, he was just a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Under the heavy slashes, the Fat Cultivator continued to bleed. Finally, at a certain point, his pagoda could no longer provide him with any protection. The brilliance of the pagoda dimmed, and it lost most of its spirituality. Then it crumbled. Accompanied by a muffled sound, the battle ended. The Blood Sea disappeared, revealing 2 figures. Lu Yi stood in the air. The Pan Mountain saber had already been sheathed. The Fat Law Cultivator fell in front of him. He was not dead yet, just hanging on by a breath. 0 Although he had just experienced a life-and-death battle, Lu Yi actually admired this person. Because even though he was at an absolute disadvantage and had no power to resist, the Fat Law Cultivator did not beg for mercy. Because he knew that since he came with the intention to kill, it was only right for others to kill him. He could not say that he had failed to kill someone and wanted others to let him go. I've embarrassed myself in front of you, fellow Taoist. The fat man sighed heavily. Lu Yi was silent. He did not know what to say to a person who was bound to die, and who was killed by him. So, fellow Taoist, if you had the confidence to defeat me from the start, why didn't you make a move? The fat man asked. This was also what he was most confused about. If Lu Yi had displayed his amazing skills from the start, he would have turned around and left. He would not have bothered with Lu Yi at all. Saying that he was deliberately showing weakness? That did not seem right. Because throughout the entire process, the Law Cultivator also took a huge risk. If he was not careful, he would have played himself to death. The Law Cultivator did not think that the other party had such intentions. Lu Yi did not want to say anything, but since the other party had asked, he would just treat it as a casual chat. After all, the battle was already over. I'm from a small place and don't have much experience. Since I have the chance, I should train myself and broaden my horizons. I should see what the demons of other domains have. This was a good reason. The Law Cultivator could not help but laugh. So the other party had treated him as a whetstone, and he had perfectly completed the task of this role. What a coincidence. I'm also from a small place. The Law Cultivator smiled. So, Fellow Taoist, it's best that you don't use me as a standard to measure the demons of the top domains. You should be more careful when fighting against them. All right. Changing the topic, the law cultivator said, but with fellow Taoist skills, the top 100 is stable. I wish fellow Taoist a smooth and successful future. All right. Lu Yi nodded. Thank you. All right. If someone who did not know the situation saw this scene, they would probably think that two friends were chatting and would not be able to see the dangers of the life and death battle just now. Sigh, what a short and hasty life. The fat man sighed heavily again. When he finished speaking, his head tilted and his entire body fell down. Lu Yi raised his hand and caught the corpse. Activating his spiritual power, a flame shot up into the sky. A moment later, he destroyed the corpse and destroyed all traces. Then he collected the storage bag and treasured fan that the other party had left behind and left the place. The conversation with the fat law cultivator was not bad, but this did not prevent him from collecting the spoils of war. This was also what he deserved. Chapter 12:38. Lu Yi found that he seemed to have made a mistake. He had thought that everyone would be running around like him in the early stages of the battle for the Divine Sea. But now that he thought about it, there might be people who would do that, but there wouldn't be too many of them. Most people would lie low and wait for an opportunity to make a move instead of exposing themselves openly. In a battle of this level, whoever exposed themselves first would be at a disadvantage because it was easy to be targeted. Therefore, those who dared to do so were definitely the top monsters from the top domains, the first batch of 100 people who rushed into the Alpha Origin realm. Those Divine Sea experts from ordinary large domains definitely wouldn't have the guts to be too ostentatious. This was probably the reason why he had only encountered 3 battles in the few days he had been in the Alpha Origin realm. Except for the blood cultivator he encountered when he first entered. The second person he encountered was a fat law cultivator. His clone encountered another person. Besides that, there was no one else. No one else noticed. The opponent the clone encountered was a body cultivator of an unknown race. His body was covered in exuberant hair, like a gorilla that had turned into a spirit. In terms of strength and foundation, he was almost on par with the fat law cultivator. Even though the clone controlled the sword gourd and had unparalleled sword chi, the battle was still very fierce. Although the clone could activate all the means of the main body, Lu Yi himself was a weapon cultivator who used the blade. His attainments in the sword Dao were all obtained by imprinting the dragon soaring realm's source energy. In the past, when his cultivation wasn't high, his attainments in the sword Dao surpassed his understanding of the blade. But now, as his cultivation gradually increased, this gap was gradually narrowed. This was also the reason why Lu Yi still insisted on walking his own path even after obtaining the dragon soaring realm source energy and imprinting the cultivation of many experts in the dragon soaring realm. Only one's own path could continue to develop. Even if one was strong for a while, one's achievements would ultimately be limited. Now it seemed that his persistence back then was correct, and he didn't lose his head because of temporary gains and losses. Therefore, at this stage, even if the main body and the clone had the same foundation, in terms of true strength, the main body was definitely stronger, while the clone was slightly inferior. If his main body were to encounter that body cultivator of an unknown race, it would be a fierce battle, but it wouldn't be difficult for him to win. It would be nothing more than the close-quarters combat that he was most familiar with. With the mountain-grinding blade that had fused with the soul-severing blade in his hand, his main body would have a great advantage against this kind of enemy who liked to get close. On the other hand, his doppelganger wasn't as good. That body cultivator's exuberant hair was completely the most natural defense. When the sword chi slashed on his body, its power would often be greatly reduced. The body cultivator forcibly endured the unparalleled attacks of the sword chi and charged in front of the clone. He originally thought that he would be able to seize the advantage and end the battle with one strike, but who knew that the clone would use the blood sea technique? The body cultivator was dumbfounded. The result was obvious. The body cultivator was trapped in the sea of blood and was unable to advance or retreat. During the intense battle, he scolded the clone. He scolded the clone for being cunning and sly, scolded the clone for being shameless. Compared to the fat Dharma cultivator who had accepted his fate and admitted defeat, he seemed like a sore loser. He probably knew that even if he begged for mercy, the clone would not really let him go. Cultivators who had entered the alpha origin stage might know that they were not strong enough and would withdraw safely, but this would never happen in a battle. Even if there was a verbal agreement between the two parties, and the victor would let the loser off the hook, would the loser really willingly withdraw? If he turned around and ran, it would be troublesome. Therefore, it was better not to clash with each other. Once there was a conflict, it was best to kill them all. This was the safest way. Lu Ye's main body no longer bothered to search for anything. The alpha origin stage was very large, and even if he searched, it would be very difficult to find anything. Thus, he let his clone wander around. As for the main body, he had discovered a spirit jade vein. It wasn't that he had good eyesight and immediately found the spirit jade vein, but that there were traces of someone mining here. Therefore, it was very difficult not to be discovered if one passed by nearby. As for who had collected it, one could guess even with one's toes. It must have been done by a cultivator who had entered the alpha origin stage 100 years ago, or even longer ago. Because the traces left behind in the vein had been there for some time, and were definitely not recent. Spirit jade was a cultivation resource that was exclusive to cultivators above the constellation stage. Cultivators below the constellation stage were unable to absorb and refine the condensation of spirit jade. It basically only existed in the starry sky or some dead stars, desolate stars. Of course, there were also top-level domains. For example, the 9 provinces and the Wuxia continent, which had traces of life, would not produce spirit jade. This was because the energy that these domains absorbed from the starry sky would be digested and turned into a foundation for their growth. Naturally, there would be no condensation of spirit jade. Dead stars and desolate stars were different. They did not have life, could not be digested, and did not need to grow. After years of accumulation, spirit jade would naturally be produced. In the starry sky, other than the alpha origin stage of the reincarnation tree, there was no other way for the divine sea stage to directly obtain spirit jade. They had all come here because they were about to advance to the constellation stage. Although they could not use it now, they would soon be able to use it. It was better to collect some as early as possible. Lu Yi had heard Jianghu and the others talk about their experience of collecting spirit jade in the starry sky. There was no difficulty, and it was nothing more than picking them up. However, after trying it out, he discovered that things were different from what Jianghu and the others had described. Because the spirit jades here were from the same vein, the spirit jades were tightly glued together. What he needed to do was to separate the spirit jades from their respective edges. If there was even the slightest mistake during the process, the spirit jades would be damaged in the slightest, and the energy contained within would quickly dissipate. He had never come into contact with spirit jade before. Now that he had come into contact with it, he discovered that it was not actually a crystal like he had imagined. It might be very hard, but that was only the hardening of the surface. Inside, it was filled with pure, flowing energy. As a result, it could not be damaged at all during the collection process. Once it was damaged, the piece of spirit jade would be wasted. This thing gave Lu Yi the feeling that it was like a berry. The surface was hardened, and the inside was as dense as paste. Jianghu and the others found it simple because the spirit jade in the starry sky was separated into individual pieces, so they only needed to pick them up. However, the spirit jades in the spirit jade mine were stuck together. They were stuck together. Lu Yi needed to think of a way to separate them before he could collect them. 1 inch the beginning, Lu Yi did not know this. He went all out, but in the end he obtained very little. Most of the spirit jades were destroyed. He had exquisite control over his own spirit power. Logically speaking, this should not be difficult. However, after figuring out the method, he discovered that it was very time-consuming. Because the process of using spirit power to cut the spirit jade was very slow, the slightest carelessness during the process would cause damage to the surface of the spirit jade. Therefore, he worked here for 3 full days and only obtained less than 300 spirit jades. This kind of harvest was undoubtedly a lot compared to Jianghu and the others' exploration in the starry sky. However, in front of him was a spirit jade mine. If he took as he pleased, the result would be very unsatisfactory. However, this matter could not be rushed. He could only be patient and take it slowly. In any case, he had his clone wandering around outside. It would not affect his battle for the deity sea too much. He now had the 3 birds. For an early-stage battle record, it was already very good. If his clone was lucky, he might be able to obtain more. It would be fine for his main body to waste some time here. Of course, Lu Yi would not stay here forever. According to Yang Qing, the A-22's range of movement would be reduced every time the A-22 was removed. Who knows? At that time, this place would become a restricted area. By then, he would have to leave even if he did not want to. While he could still stay here, he would try to collect as many spirit jades as possible. This was the most simple idea of a deity sea realm cultivator from a small place. Du Lang was like a frightened rabbit. He kept looking around while flying. He was flying very low. He was only 300 feet above the ground. For a deity sea realm cultivator, this height was very unusual. If there was an ambush on the ground, it would be easy to be sneak attacked. However, Du Lang had no choice. Compared to flying high, it was easier to attract attention. He had to choose a safer flying height. He could only hope that in the beginning, everyone would be scattered and no one would coincidentally be hiding in his path. After all, this was a very low probability event. The reason why he was so nervous was that he did not have much time left. He had to rush to a place and he could not stay in that place for too long. The rules of the battle for the deity sea realm did not allow it. There was a spirit jade mine in that place. There were extremely rich spirit jade resources stored inside. Because of some special reasons, he and the domain he was in needed a large amount of spirit jade to deal with the emergency. It was too late to count on his own elders to search the starry sky. Time waited for no one. Moreover, there were not many elders above the constellation realm left in his domain. In the end, Nong Ti had entrusted him with the M6B1N. The reason why he knew there was a spirit jade mine there was naturally because there were elders who had mined there and left a detailed roadmap. He was not lucky because he could not find a trace of familiarity in the place he appeared. Without a landmark landform to compare, the road map in his hand was completely a decoration. His luck was not bad either. After searching for several days, he finally found a place and a road. The landmarks on the map overlapped. In this way, Wanzheng was clear. According to his estimate, if everything went smoothly, he would have about a month to show his strength. Such a long time should be enough with his preparations. After going through untold hardships, he finally arrived at the location of the spirit jade mine. It was at the foot of an inconspicuous little hill. Small hills like this could be found everywhere in the Alpha Origin region. Therefore, if not for first impressions, no one would have thought that there was a spirit jade mine here. The elders of his domain were only able to discover this place by chance. The inside story was not worth mentioning. Chapter 1239. Du Lang vigilantly sensed his surroundings again, and after confirming that there were no signs of life, he lowered his body and looked around. Hidden by the lush grass, a dark passage came into view. It seemed that no one had discovered this place yet. It was easy to determine this. If this spirit jade lode had really been discovered, there would definitely be some concealment methods at the entrance to avoid being discovered by others. Although not everyone was proficient in spirit arrays and could arrange concealment spirit arrays, cultivators who had reached the spirit sea realm still had some simple concealment methods. Since there were no traces of concealment at the entrance of the cave, it meant that no one had discovered this place yet. This was undoubtedly good news for him, otherwise, he would really have to fight with someone, which was the situation he was most unwilling to face. He knew his own strength, and although his foundation wasn't bad, it was still inferior to those monsters from top domains. If he encountered one of them, he really might not be able to defeat them. Walking into the cave, Du Lang made some simple arrangements to conceal the existence of the cave entrance and went all the way down. However, he didn't go far before Du Lang paused and frowned. He thought that no one had discovered this place, But after entering, he discovered that someone had actually arrived here before him. Because there were spirit chi fluctuations in front of the passage, it was obvious that someone was mining spirit jades. This was really bad news. However, after carefully probing, a look of surprise appeared on his face, because inferring from the spirit chi fluctuations coming from the other party, this person was actually only an 8th order spirit C realm cultivator. An 8th order spirit C realm cultivator was participating in the spirit C battle? Du Lang couldn't believe it. After carefully probing, he confirmed that the other party was indeed only an 8th order spirit C realm cultivator. This was strange. Which domain's master was so bold as to bring such a person to participate in this grand event? Was this person's domain lacking in talent? Or did this person have some special ability? But even if this person had some special ability, the gap in cultivation was obvious. Normal domains wouldn't allow an 8th order cultivator to come here. From this point of view, it was more likely that the other party's domain had 0 talent, just like the domain he was in. The starry sky was vast and there were countless domains. Some were like the 9 regions, which were radiating new life and flourishing, and some were like the domain where Dulang was located, which was heading towards the end of its road and had exhausted its spiritual power. Like living beings, realms had lifespans. However, in comparison, the lifespan of realms was incomparably long. They could easily live for millions of years. At this point, Du Lang could not help but feel that they were in the same boat. They were all pitiful people, so there seemed to be no need to make things difficult for each other. Things were neither good nor bad for him. Someone had arrived first, but the other party was only an 8th order divine sea cultivator, so there were only 2 choices in front of him. Death and the other. The first was to ignore him. Minato Shinjin's hands. Although there was only one way in from the lode, however, there were many forked paths inside. He only needed to choose one of the forked paths. As long as the other party didn't have any ill intentions, they would have nothing to do with each other. With a quick thought, he made up his mind. He didn't bother to hide his figure and directly rushed in the direction of the stranger. However, he still had to be vigilant. The other party's reactions seemed to be very slow. It wasn't until Du Lang was not far away that the other party hurriedly turned around to look at him. The passage was dim, but it did not hinder the view of a divine sea cultivator. What entered Du Lang's eyes was the appearance of a young man around 24 or 25 years old, dressed like a typical armament cultivator. "Little brother, what's wrong with you? People say that birds die for food and men die for wealth. Although spirit jades are good, you can't let your guard down." In Du Lang's view, this guy was completely a greenhorn. Not only did he not cover up the entrance of the cave, but he didn't even notice that someone else had walked in. Fortunately, it was him. If it was someone else who came and blocked him here, then it would really be impossible for him to call for help. At that time, he would probably only be buried here. Of course, Du Wan also wondered if this was because the other party had nothing to fear. However, even if they were from a top realm, they wouldn't act like this. Confidence and arrogance were 2 completely different concepts. Of course, the geniuses from top realms wouldn't come to the Alpha origin to collect spirit jades. Spirit jades were produced in their own realms, so why would they waste their time here? They might collect some spirit flowers and herbs that didn't exist in the outside world, but they definitely wouldn't spend too much effort on spirit jades. Lu Yi nodded to the other party. "I've made a fool of myself. I'm from a small place and haven't seen much of the world. I'm careless in my actions. Thank you for your advice." Du Lang was very satisfied with his attitude. He was afraid of the kind of ingrate who didn't appreciate his kind advice. From the looks of it, the other party wasn't a difficult person to get along with. Cultivators from small places were generally not difficult to get along with, just like Du Lang. Only those guys from top realms were all arrogant and wished they could walk with their noses in the air. "I've covered up the entrance. As long as you don't look carefully, no one should find out. Since there's an opportunity in front of you, you should cherish it. Even if you can't get a place in the top 100 of the Divine Sea battle, it's good to get some spirit jades." Du Lang said and turned to leave. He didn't intend to have a deep conversation with the other party. He just followed them and pointed out that they were tired. After that, everyone would go their separate ways. Perhaps they wouldn't meet again in the future, so there was naturally no need to have any deep friendship. After taking a few steps, Dou Lang said again, "By the way, this position can only be maintained for another 20 days at most. When the Alpha Origin stage shrinks the area for the third time, this place will be excluded." Lu Yi understood. It was similar to what he thought. He felt that he couldn't stay in this place forever. He nodded and said, "Thank you for telling me." Looking at Dou Lang's departing figure, his expression was calm. Dou Lang thought that he was careless, so he didn't cover up the entrance of the cave. In fact, he did it on purpose. If someone really thought they could block him here, there would be a big surprise. And even if the situation was extremely bad for him, he could still teleport out through the teleportation array that he had left outside. He wouldn't really let himself be trapped here. When Dou Lang came in, he noticed it. He thought he was going to deliver his head to him, but it turned out that the other party had no intention of fighting him at all. The other party was a 9th Order, but after seeing him, an 8th Order, not only did he not take the initiative to attack, he even kindly warned him. Of course, Lu Yi could distinguish between right and wrong. In the Battle of the Divine Sea, one's harvest was indeed important, and it was related to one's final ranking, but Lu Yi was not a bloodthirsty person. He wouldn't just kill anyone he saw. This was a principle of life. If he really did that, he would really be an ungrateful wretch. Soon, Lu Yi felt a surge of spirit energy coming from the spirit load channel in the distance next door. Obviously, the other party was mining spirit jade. Lu Yi thought about it for a moment before walking over. He wanted to see how others mined spirit jade. Maybe he could learn a thing or two and improve his efficiency. Dou Lang noticed his arrival and looked at him with a little vigilance. Lu Yi cupped his fists and said, "Please forgive me, Dao brother. This is the first time little brother has seen this spirit jade lode, and mining it is a bit difficult, so I wanted to learn from you." Understood. Dou Lang understood what he meant and laughed. "I won't hide it from you, little brother. This is also the first time I've seen a spirit jade lode. There are no tricks to mining spirit jade, it's just a painstaking effort, but you can use some foreign objects. You must have seen it, this is the method I prepared in advance." Understood. Lu Yi did see it. The spirit jade lode in front of Dou Lang was covered with insects. These insects looked like ants, but each one had wings. They were spread over the spirit jade lode, and the sound of gnawing could be heard constantly. Dou Lang explained, "These are jade-eating ants. They are specially used to mine spirit jade. They can gnaw away the adhesive material between the spirit jade, but they can't gnaw away the hard skin of the spirit jade." Understood. Lu Yi understood. Dou Lang had come prepared, unlike him. He had found this place by chance, and this was his first time mining it. In the end, he was a bit hasty. As he watched, the movements of the jade-eating ants continued to spread out, and soon, spirit jades loosened from the load and fell off. "Come down." What Dou Lang needed to do was very simple, he just needed to collect them. Lu Yi was extremely envious. Such mining efficiency was much better than the time and effort he had to spend on the other side. Dou Lang obviously didn't know what Lu Yi was thinking when he saw his expression. However, his main purpose in coming to the Alpha Origin was to mine spirit jade. He wouldn't have such a good opportunity at other times, so even if he knew what Lu Yi was thinking, he couldn't say anything. Moreover, there was no friendship between the two of them. It was just a coincidence that they came here, so they could be considered to be acquaintances. After observing for a while, Lu Yi cupped his fists and said, "I'm sorry to disturb you." Although he was envious, he couldn't imitate Dou Lang. He couldn't stay here and watch. It was better to go back and slowly mine spirit jade himself. Although such a stupid mining method was inefficient, it was much more efficient than Jianghu and the others searching in the starry sky. People can't be satisfied with what they have. Seeing him leave, Dou Lang sighed and gritted his teeth. "Little brother, I'll give you some jade-eating ants, you can use them." 2. They were all pitiful people. There was a treasure mountain in front of them, but they couldn't use it. If they could help, they would help. It was nothing more than mining less spirit jade. Moreover, in his plan, if nothing unexpected happened, the remaining time was enough for him to mine the spirit jade he needed. While speaking, he stepped forward and collected a batch of jade-eating ants. There weren't many of them, only less than 10% of the total. He put them in a spirit beast bag and tossed it to Lu Yi. Chapter 1240. Lu Yi raised his hand to catch it and couldn't help but be surprised. Lu Yi could tell from the fact that the other party didn't try to sneak attack him when he walked into the mine, and instead openly revealed his presence and even gave him some advice. Lu Yi knew that this person wasn't a person who liked to fight, but had a good heart and didn't seem to care much about the battle of the Divine Sea. If it were other cultivators who were determined to win the battle of the Divine Sea, they wouldn't have greeted him. They would have concealed their aura and launched a sneak attack first, and perhaps even obtained a share of the loot. Especially with his cultivation, it was a temptation to any cultivator who had entered the Alpha Origin stage. Now that he had taken the initiative to give him Jade Ants, it was equivalent to giving him Spirit Jade. Of course, he didn't know that Dou Lang had preconceived of him as someone like him, and that they were in the same boat. In such an environment, lending a helping hand to someone who was in the same boat was in fact subconsciously hoping that someone would lend him a helping hand when he was in trouble. It was just that Dou Lang himself didn't realize this subtle mentality. Lu Yi wasn't a pretentious person. What Dou Lang had given him was exactly what he needed, so he naturally had no reason to refuse, but he also couldn't take the benefits for free. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Thank you, brother. Take this as a gift in return, please don't refuse." He had a few treasures that he could take out now. One was naturally the Void Beast core he obtained in the insect's tree world, but this thing couldn't be shown to others. There was the shadow of the Insect Emperor realm behind it. If he really gave it away, it wouldn't be a thank you gift, and it might even be used as a funeral. In addition, the 2 short pestles of Yanji and the fan of the Fat Cultivator were both spoils of war obtained from killing enemies. They were of good quality and could probably be sold for some spirit jade. Lu Yi took out the treasured fan. He wanted to keep the pestles and use them to forge the Pan Mountain Blade in the future. The fan was used by cultivators, so it wasn't of much use to him. He couldn't use it to disguise himself as a cultivator. With a push of his spirit power, the fan floated towards Dou Lang. Dou Lang caught it and couldn't help but laugh. He felt that Lu Yi was also a wonderful person. Cultivators from small places like them all had a common problem. Although they were willing to be kind to others, their self-esteem was extremely strong. Therefore, when they received benefits from others, they would definitely express their gratitude. However, Yang Kai didn't care too much. What good things could an 8th Order Divine Sea cultivator bring out? But when Dou Lang took a closer look, he was surprised to find that the quality of this treasured fan was extraordinary. Not to mention the Divine Ocean Realm, even the Constellation Realm could use it. If he took this thing out, he could easily sell it for a lot of spirit jades. As for how much he could sell it for, Dou Lang had no idea. He was just a spirit sea realm cultivator and hadn't come into contact with the starry sky. How could he know the prices in the starry sky? A puzzled thought flashed through his mind. How could this weapon cultivator have such a treasure that clearly belonged to a spell cultivator? Lu Yi took the bag of jade-eating ants back to his own passage and released them. Without needing to command them, the jade-eating ants immediately spread over the large pieces of spirit jades like cats that had smelled blood. The sound of their gnawing was extremely pleasing to the ear. Lu Yi didn't wait around. There weren't many jade-eating ants on his side, so the amount of spirit jades he could harvest was limited. He had more than 20 days, so naturally he couldn't waste it. So, while the jade-eating ants helped him harvest spirit jades, he didn't idle around either. He used the old method to slowly harvest spirit jades. Time passed by. In the spirit jade lode, there were 2 forks in the road. 2 cultivators from 2 different worlds were busy with their own tasks. As he continued mining, Lu Yi slowly discovered something special. In this spirit jade lode, there was something similar to spirit jades, but it wasn't spirit jades. It had a darker color and a firmer texture. The energy contained in it was obviously richer and purer. Even if Lu Yi hadn't come into contact with it, he knew what it was. Spirit crystals. Spirit stones were divided into 3 grades, and spirit jades weren't divided into grades. However, above spirit jades, There was an even higher grade item, and that was spirit crystals. Their value was even higher than spirit jades, but they were very rare, especially in the starry sky. Jianghu and the others had collected over 10,000 pieces of spirit jades, but there were only a few spirit crystals. They had all been discovered by chance. Since this was a spirit jade lode, spirit crystals were naturally produced. Moreover, the proportion was quite high, which was undoubtedly an unexpected gain. Time flew by, and several days later, Lu Yi, who was mining spirit jades, suddenly sensed something. Immediately after, the world buzzed, as if thunder was rumbling. In the next instant, Lu Yi felt a faint repulsive force coming from a certain direction. He understood that this was the alpha origin stage shrinking. Calculating the time, today was exactly the 10th day since the alpha origin stage had opened. If the alpha origin stage was viewed as a huge circle, then as time passed, the area covered by the circle would become smaller and smaller, until it would eventually become a small circle with a radius of only 10,000 miles. That was where the final battle would take place for the monstrous geniuses of the various domains. Each time the range was reduced, it should be an integer of 10 days. The reason why he felt a trace of repulsive force was because the range was shrinking. Following the direction of the repulsive force was rushing towards the center. At present, the repulsive force was still very weak, because the reduced range had yet to cover the spirit jade lode. Once the range was reduced, the repulsive force would become incomparably strong. At that time, cultivators wouldn't be able to stay even if they wanted to, and would be pushed forward. Therefore, the area where the spirit jade lode was located would be the area covered by the alpha origin stage for the third time. This was also the reason why Du Lang had reminded Lu Yi that they could only stay here for over 20 days. Once the range was reduced, the cultivators would naturally be more concentrated. Of course, the area where the alpha origin stage could move was still very large, but it was slightly better than before. 2 days after the alpha origin stage's range was reduced for the first time, Lu Ye's doppelganger finally made a new discovery. Following the sounds of battle, he soon saw 2 figures entangled together. One was a demon with horns on his head, and the other was a physique cultivator of the human clan. They were fighting fiercely over there. It was a grand scene. It could be seen that these 2 fellows were already fighting to the death. Due to their fighting styles, their fists hit the flesh and it was very intense. Lu Ye's doppelganger concealed his figure and aura as he silently observed from the side. But as he watched, he realized that something wasn't right. The battle between the 2 guys was rapidly moving towards his hiding place. Was he exposed? Lu Yi didn't know how he was exposed, because his concealment methods were very clever. In the 9 provinces, it was basically impossible to see through his concealment. However, the monsters from each domain couldn't be judged by common sense. They always had some unexpected abilities. Lu Yi didn't know who had discovered his tracks, but the 2 guys, who were evenly matched, had obviously reached a consensus: first deal with the sneaky spectator. Luck was the reason why the battle was moving towards him without leaving a trace. He was also a decisive person. Since he knew that he had been exposed, there was no need to hide anymore. The sword gourd shook, and the sword chi that blotted out the sky and covered the earth turned into a long river that swept towards the 2 fellows. The body cultivator and the demon obviously didn't expect Lu Yi to be so bold, but at this point, they couldn't retreat. They tacitly split up and rushed out of the sword river from the left and right, pouncing towards Lu Ye's doppelganger. After this exchange, Lu Yi knew that these 2 guys had extraordinary foundations. It was impossible for an ordinary Divine Sea Realm cultivator to break through his sword river so easily. Of course, the 2 had thick skin and flesh, but it was also a reflection of their strength. In a one-on-one battle, Lu Ye's doppelganger was confident that he could take down either of them. However, if it was 1 against 2, it would be a bit troublesome. Even if he spread out the blood river, he might not be able to finish the battle in a short time. After all, the doppelganger was not the original body, and the cultivators who could participate in the battle of the Divine Sea Realm were not the same as the insect guards in the insect nest. These 2 were all top Divine Sea Realm cultivators in their respective domains. Of course, It was hard to say how well these two guys, who were still fighting to the death, could cooperate. They would definitely be on guard against each other. Realizing that these two guys were difficult to deal with, Lu Ye's doppelganger turned around and ran. The body cultivator and the demon chased after him. In mid-air, 3 figures, 1 in front and 2 behind, quickly swept past. In the pursuit, although the body cultivator and the demon still had to constantly resist the attacks from the sword chi, they didn't slow down in the slightest. Just as the demon's momentum rumbled and blocked the sword chi, a strange power fluctuation suddenly came from behind him. The next moment, there was an additional fierce aura. The demon turned around in shock, only to see that there was an additional figure behind him. Judging from the face, it was the guy who escaped in front, but his attire was a little different. The one who escaped was obviously a sword cultivator, but the one who suddenly appeared was a weapon cultivator. Both of them had the same cultivation, only an 8th order divine C. Twins? The demon's mind was a little confused. But that shouldn't be the case. Generally speaking, a large realm would only have 1 spot to participate in the Alpha Origin realm. Only the top realms would have 2 or 3 spots. But how could a top realm allow an 8th order divine C cultivator to participate? There was no time to think about it. The weapon cultivator who suddenly appeared slashed down with a long saber in his hand. The demon raised his arms and pushed his vitality to protect himself. This saber strike caused the demon's body to sink down, but it didn't affect him much. It was obvious how strong his defense was. Lu Yi was very dissatisfied. If he had released Lu Yingying and used her blessing on him, this saber strike should have been effective. Even if it only scratched his opponent's skin, the power of the soul-splitting saber would have been enough. It would have been able to bloom. But without Lu Yingying's blessing, his sharpness spirit crests were a little unsatisfactory. After all, these opponents in the Alpha Origin realm were not ordinary divine C cultivators. Chapter 1241. Lu Yi felt that his attack was barely satisfactory, but what he didn't know was that this body cultivator was extremely shocked, because the violent power transmitted from his opponent's saber made him feel like he was inferior. How was this a weapon cultivator? It wouldn't be wrong to say that he was a body cultivator. What shocked him even more was that when the weapon cultivator suddenly appeared and slashed down with his saber, a bloody light surged out from behind him and swept over like a river flowing in reverse. The body cultivator couldn't figure out what kind of person this guy was. From his attire, there was no doubt that he was a weapon cultivator, but judging from his strength, he had the foundation of a body cultivator. Judging from the bloody light, it was clearly a blood art, and there was also the shadow of a spell cultivator, a triple art cultivator? What kind of freak was this? When the body cultivator was ambushed, the demons sensed it but didn't care. They were competitors, so why would they care about the life or death of others? He wasn't the one who was ambushed, so he only focused on chasing the fleeing figure in front of him. However, the sword cultivator didn't run. Not only did he not run, but he turned around and flew towards him with a long sword in his hand. The sword cultivator didn't use a flying sword, but he wanted to fight him in close combat? What kind of sword cultivator was this? The demon made a sound as his chi and blood surged, and his body seemed to have expanded. He was about to teach the sword cultivator a lesson, but he didn't expect the bloody light behind him to suddenly spread out. Looking from afar, one could see that Lu Yi and his doppelganger were flanking the body cultivator and the demon. Each of them activated the blood sea art, and a vast scale of blood quickly enveloped the center. In the blink of an eye, a huge blood ball appeared in the sky, and the 4 figures disappeared together. The demon who was wrapped in it was fearless. He lowered his head and charged forward. The horns on his head flickered with an inexplicable light, as if he was going to smash even a mountain in front of him. This was a fighting technique that was unique to him. It was not as simple as just colliding. When he collided, his chi, blood, and spiritual energy would vibrate in a very regular way, sending a huge pulling force to the fan-shaped area in front of him. Once the enemy was in this area, it would be like falling into a swamp. Even if it was only delayed for half a breath, it was enough to penetrate the enemy. However, there was a drawback to using this move. and that was that he had to put some distance between himself and his opponent. Previously, he did not have the opportunity to do so in his battle with the body cultivator. Now, it was the perfect time to use this blind sword cultivator as an example. This collision was indeed earth-shattering. Even the thick power of the sea of blood could not stop him in the slightest. However, the result stunned him because he had hit nothing. His divine sense had clearly locked onto the sword cultivator who was charging towards him, but the other party had suddenly and inexplicably disappeared. The sounds of an intense battle came from behind him, mixed with the angry shouts of a body cultivator. The demon's face darkened. He immediately realized where the sword cultivator had gone. He had obviously joined forces with the ambusher to deal with the body cultivator. Even if he was a member of the monster race, he knew that the sea of blood was not a place to stay for long. Therefore, after a moment of hesitation, he continued to charge forward. That body cultivator was most likely doomed, but he could take advantage of the other party's entanglement to escape. He did not know where the sword cultivator and the ambusher came from, but their cooperation was very close. Moreover, the 8th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivation was too deceptive. Now, it seemed that if he did not have some ability, how could he have come to the Alpha Origin Realm? In this place, the strength of any existence one encountered could not be judged purely by their realm. He did not think of turning around to rescue the body cultivator. He neither had the heart nor the need to. After all, they were competitors. Even if he saved the body cultivator, the other party would not be grateful. He thought that the body cultivator would be able to buy him a lot of time. After all, he was well aware of the other party's strength. However, he had only taken a few steps when the body cultivator's angry shouts turned into screams, followed by more and more miserable screams, as if he had experienced inhumane torture. The demon turned pale with fright. He did not know what was going on behind him, but the body cultivator's strength was on par with his, so the situation was obviously not good. How long had it been? It had only been 2 or 3 breaths since the blood sea spread out. In other words, if he had been the one targeted just now, wouldn't he have suffered the same fate? Sure enough, I need to leave here as soon as possible. The stickiness and binding of the blood sea did not have much effect on him, but even after charging forward for a long time, he still could not break out of the blood sea's range. For this to happen, either the blood sea's range was much larger than he imagined, or the other party had used some kind of method to affect his perception, causing him to have an error in his sense of direction. Therefore, he felt that he was rushing forward, but in fact, he was going around in circles in the blood sea. But for an 8th Order Divine Sea Realm cultivator to display a blood skill, how large could its range be? But it was also unlikely that the other party had used some kind of method to affect his perception. He had never heard of blood techniques having such a strange ability. He was right. Lu Ye's blood sea technique did not affect his perception, but the spirit array could. The range covered by the blood sea technique was an extension of the fusion of his blood chi and spirit energy. The blood sea was just an external manifestation of these forces. Therefore, he could construct void spirit inscriptions anywhere in the blood sea to achieve short-distance teleportation between his main body and his avatar. Since he could construct void spirit inscriptions, he could naturally construct other spirit inscriptions and use the blood sea as a foundation to set up his spirit array. This idea was a new one, and it was also the first time Lu Yi had tried it. As for the effect, the bull monster rushed forward foolishly, thinking that it could rush out of the blood sea in one breath, but in fact, it had fallen into an illusion array and was still unconscious. This method could only be used to deal with a single monster race cultivator. If it were a human race cultivator or any other race proficient in spirit arts, it would be easy for them to see some flaws and target them. After all, the only drawback of setting up a spirit array in the blood sea was that it was not sturdy enough, because there was no solid foundation for the spirit array. There were also advantages in that it could be repaired and adjusted at any time. Therefore, everything had its pros and cons, depending on which angle one looked at it from. Although the bull monster looked a little foolish, with its foundation, it would not take long for it to notice the clues. At that time, it would not be easy to trap it. However, there was no need to lie to it for too long. The demon ox quickly saw through the formation. As he closed and opened his eyes, a faint light flashed in his eyes. He quickly saw that around the blood sea he was in, there were red lines that were denser than the surrounding blood sea. They were connected to each other. That was a large and complicated formation. There were rumors in the mortal world that the bull's eyes could see some things that ordinary people could not. If a mortal's eyes were smeared with bull's tears, they would also temporarily possess this ability. Many of the rumors among mortals were nonsense, but some of them were based on evidence. The bull monster's race clearly had some unusual power. Since it had seen it clearly, it would be easy to break it. The bull monster was furious, and its demonic power surged. It was about to destroy the spirit array that trapped it, but just as the thought appeared in its mind, its heart turned cold. It could clearly sense that the body cultivator's aura in the blood sea had disappeared. In the next instant, two sharp auras attacked it from the left and right. It turned pale with fright. How long had it been? At the very most, 10 breaths of time had passed. A body cultivator of the same strength as itself had been killed. Even if it was because of the inconvenience of being in the blood sea, it should not have been so quickly defeated. Just how strong was that sneak attacker? If the body cultivator could not even last 10 breaths, how long could it have lasted? Without any hesitation, it immediately broke out of the spirit array and fled. It did not want to follow in the footsteps of the body cultivator. If it wanted to live, it could only escape from the blood sea as soon as possible. Before coming here, his elders had warned him not to underestimate others just because he was the best in his domain. There were many people in other domains who were stronger than him. Moreover, due to the different races, every race had their own unique abilities. He kept this in mind, but after entering the Alpha Origin stage and encountering a few opponents, this caution had slowly disappeared. He had discovered that most of the opponents he had encountered were weaker than himself, with only that body cultivator from earlier being on par with him. So, the elders of the other realms must have told their juniors the same thing. Maybe he belonged to the stronger group? He had been quite proud of himself before. However, this pride had now turned into a bubble, and only fear was left. The edge of the huge blood sphere in the sky squirmed, and a head with bull horns poked out. The surprise on its face had not even had time to relax before it turned into fear. It then uncontrollably retracted its head, as if someone was pulling it back from behind. The blood sphere rapidly shrank, becoming more condensed and restrained, and sounds of fighting could be heard from inside. However, it soon calmed down. When the snowball dissipated, only the clone Li Taibai's figure was left. The original body was long gone, and even the bodies of the two cultivators who died here had been destroyed. The clone quickly flew into the distance, found a place to rest, and prepared to continue strolling around. Lu Yi returned to the spirit jade vein through the teleportation array he had previously reserved. There would definitely be some spirit power undulations from his trip back and forth, which might arouse the suspicion of the fellow cultivator next door. But then again, he had been using his spirit power to collect spirit jade all this time, so as long as he was not too concerned, he might not be able to detect the situation on his side. After all, he had not been away for too long. As soon as he returned, Lu Yi sensed a very fierce spirit power undulation from the tunnel next door. Someone is fighting their way in? However, Lu Yi soon realized that something was wrong, because he could not sense anyone else's aura with his divine sense. There was still only that fellow cultivator over there. He did not know what the other party was up to, but it seemed to be in full swing. Curious, Lu Yi set off to investigate. 3. Chapter 1242. When Lu Yi retracted his aura and rushed to the tunnel next door, he saw that fellow Taoist was chasing after a ball of dense spiritual light in a small area, jumping up and down. He didn't know what that ball of light was, but it didn't seem to have the aura of a living creature. However, its speed was incredibly fast. Even though the cultivator wasn't slow, he couldn't catch up. The ball of light repeatedly tried to break through the encirclement in the direction of the spirit jade mine, but it was intercepted every time. Lu Yi only needed to observe for a moment to understand that a spirit formation had been set up here. However, the person who set up the spirit formation wasn't very skilled, so there were still some gaps. The gap was in the direction of the spirit jade mine. This was also the reason why the ball of light was trying to break through in this direction. It had clearly sensed that this was where the life gate was. After observing for a while longer, Lu Yi realized that it would be very difficult for this fellow Taoist to capture the ball of light. If this continued, the ball of light might break through the range of the formation and he would have to flee. With a thought, he rushed forward. Before he arrived, he had already thrown out a few spirit formation flags. In the blink of an eye, he landed at a gap in the spirit formation and his spiritual powers surged out in all directions. Seeing Lu Yi arrive, Du Lang wasn't surprised. After all, they weren't far from each other, so Lu Yi could easily detect his movements. Seeing Lu Yi's actions, Du Lang immediately understood his intentions and immediately urged his spiritual power to connect with the spirit formation he had set up. There was no verbal communication and they weren't even familiar with each other, but they had formed a certain tacit understanding. Lu Yi obtained control of Du Lang's incomplete spirit formation and with the help of the spirit formation flags he had just set up, as well as his own adjustments, the spirit formation quickly became complete and even had a certain binding effect. When he activated the power of the formation, an invisible binding force suddenly descended from the sky, and the rapidly moving ball of light clearly stagnated, greatly reducing its speed. Du Lang was overjoyed and quickly rushed forward. He opened the bag he had been holding in one hand and quickly collected the ball of light. Then he closed the bag and revealed a happy expression. At the same time, Lu Yi dispersed the spirit formation's power and withdrew from the control center of the spirit formation. He raised his hand and put away his spirit formation flags. Du Lang laughed, "Many thanks, brother. If it weren't for your help, I'm afraid it really would have escaped." He sighed in his heart. Indeed, being kind to others is being kind to oneself. Previously, he had given some jade-eating ants to Lu Yi, and within a few days, Lu Yi had returned the favor. The harvest this time was more than what he had given out. The spiritual jades collected by the jade-eating ants were much more valuable. Lu Yi nodded slightly and didn't ask any more questions. He turned around and returned to his mining tunnel to continue working as a miner. Day after day passed. Within the spirit jade mine, the two of them had nothing to do with each other as they worked hard to mine spirit jades. His clone continued to roam outside, but even though the Alpha Origin stage had narrowed down the search area, it was still not easy for him to find anything. It was easy, and because it was not good for the clone to be too far away from the main body. They had to be within the range of the teleportation, only then would Mu Shi be able to send 5 reinforcements at any time. This undoubtedly greatly limited the range that the doppelganger could move about in. Therefore, there was basically nothing to gain. Another 10 days later, a buzzing sound came from the heavens and earth again. At the same time, Lu Yi felt that the pounding force coming from a certain direction had increased significantly. Moreover, this repulsive force was increasing with the passage of time. Hence, he knew that he didn't have much time left in this place. The changes in the Alpha Origin stage were urging the cultivators that were still within the range to gather together. When the repulsive force reached a certain level, it was impossible not to leave even if one didn't want to. Lu Yi decided to leave one day before the Alpha Origin stage narrowed down the search area for the 3rd time. A few days later, Du Lang walked over from his own tunnel with a few jugs of wine. He had come to express his thanks. Previously, when Lu Yi had helped him, he had not expressed much. Moreover, everyone had been immersed in the joy of the spiritual jades. It was not good to waste too much time. Now that there was not much time left, and the harvest was already sufficient, his mood had completely relaxed. Lu Yi naturally couldn't refuse the other party's great hospitality, and thus casually chatted with him over the wine. It was only at this time that the two of them introduced themselves to each other. While chatting, Lu Yi learned that Du Lang came from a domain called the Qi Sky Continent. Unlike the 9 prefectures, the Qi Sky Continent had gradually begun to decline 1,000 years ago. Originally, although the Qi Sky Continent was not a top-tier domain, it was still a very good large-scale domain. Every once in a while, many constellation stage cultivators would appear. However, since 1,000 years ago, the number of constellation stage cultivators that could be born in the Qi Sky continent had become fewer and fewer. Until the last 100 years, there were very few. This was the result of the world's foundation being lost, and its level gradually falling. According to Yang Qing, when a domain's foundation was strong enough, the worlds would instinctively respond to the cultivator's desire to ascend. Thus, there would be a divine light that would descend from the heavens, allowing divine C-stage cultivators to have the power to connect with the starry sky and advance to the constellation stage. Of course, in the 9 prefectures, Little 9 was consciously doing this. However, if the world's level fell, then the world's would instinctively protect itself, and it would no longer be able to satisfy the cultivator's desire. This was because every bit of power that could allow a cultivator to ascend to the constellation stage was a considerable loss to the world's foundation. It could be foreseen that if this situation continued, it would not take many years for the Qi Sky continent to fall to the level of the previous 9 prefectures, and it would become weaker and weaker. Therefore, the Qi Sky continent urgently needed a large amount of spirit jade. The experts of the Qi Sky continent wanted to slow down the aging of the domain by dispersing the energy in the spirit jade. This was just a concept, and no one knew whether it would work, but they had to give it a try. Currently, there were not many cultivators above the constellation stage on the Qi Sky continent. Even if they searched for spirit jade in the starry sky, what they could obtain was limited. Therefore, Dou Lang wanted to help out. It just so happened that he had a road map left behind by the seniors of the domain, which he had been searching for after entering the Alpha Origin stage. After searching for the Spirit Jade vein, the result was naturally not bad. In particular, Lu Yi had helped him capture that ball of Spirit Jade a few days ago. He did not know whether the Spirit Jade's energy could extend the domain's cultivation after dispersing, but according to the seniors, that ball of Spirit Jade could definitely do so. However, that thing was extremely rare and could only be encountered by chance. Therefore, to a certain extent, Lu Ye's actions at that time had helped him a lot. So Brother Dou is not going to participate in the upcoming battle for the Divine Sea? Lu Yi was enlightened. The main purpose of Dou Jian's trip this time was to mine Spirit Jade. Now that he had a harvest, the rest was not important. Dou Lang smiled. I want to participate too, but the risk is too great. To be honest, although I have some confidence in my own strength, there's still a gap between me and those fellows from the top domains. The battle for the deity ocean is too dangerous. If I accidentally fall, then my 1 month of hard work will be for naught. It's not that I'm afraid of death. Lu Yi nodded in understanding. He suddenly understood why Dou Jian did not attack him when they first met. It was because Dou Jian's goal was not the battle for the Divine Sea. Therefore, it did not matter to him whether he killed or not. In any case, the Spirit Jade vein was so big that it did not matter if it was 1 person or 2 people. Even if a few more people came, it would not affect his harvest. Of course, this might also have something to do with his nature. Dou Lang's temperament was not bad, and he was not the kind of person who liked to bully the weak. He was even willing to share his jade-eating ants with him. My situation is special. Brother Lu, you don't have to rely on me. If brother feels confident, he will still fight, but brother's cultivation is indeed a shortcoming. If you really show it in front of others, it will easily attract attention. Everyone knew that persimmons were easy to pinch. An 8th order cultivator was unique in this place, and it was likely that everyone would want to pinch him. Dou Lang did not try to persuade Lu Yi. The most taboo thing for cultivators was to talk too much. They were all at the Divine Sea realm, so who didn't know? Lu Yi dared to come here with his 8th order cultivation, so he must have something to rely on. Dou Lang only cared about his own people, so there was no need for him to worry about others. The 3rd time the Alpha Origin shrank was approaching, and the most obvious feeling was that the repulsive force was getting stronger and stronger. It was so strong that cultivators had to circulate their spirit qi to resist the repulsive force, otherwise, they would be pushed away. Lu Yi got up. Brother Dou, I should set off. Dou Lang nodded and cupped his fists. Then I wish brother a smooth journey ahead. Thank you. Lu Yi turned his head and looked to the side. These jade-eating ants, Dou Lang waved his hand. Since they are given to brother, There is no reason to take them back. It is not troublesome to raise them, you just need to give them spirit stones. There were still many jade-eating ants on the Red Sky continent. If he wanted, he could go back and replenish them, but Lu Yi could not. Lu Yi thanked him and walked to the side. He put away the jade ants and the spirit jades they had mined, and then he flashed out. There was no need to deliberately distinguish the direction, just follow the direction of the repulsive force. His clone was one step ahead. In the dark mine tunnel, only Do Lang was left drinking to drown his sorrows. It was the greatest opportunity for the Divine Sea realm that occurred once every 100 years. How lucky he was to be able to participate, but because of some special reasons he was unable to persist until the end. For someone like him, wasn't this a huge regret? If he missed this opportunity, there would be no next time in his life. He spoke freely to Lu Yi, but the bitterness in his heart was something only he knew. On one hand, it was an opportunity that belonged to him, and on the other hand, it was a possibility related to the future of this realm. Even if he had made up his mind long ago, he could not help but waver at this juncture. There is a small problem with my body and I need to be hospitalized for surgery. Recently, I will try to keep updating as much as possible. I hope all my brothers and sisters are healthy and free from illness. Chapter 1243. Lu Yi had already left, and Do Lang was all alone in the mine. It was only after a long time that a trace of determination appeared on his face, and he softly muttered, "I withdraw." As soon as he finished speaking, a gentle force appeared out of thin air and enveloped him. That force was like a gentle breeze that slowly flew around him. As it flew, the space around him began to distort, and after a full 10 breaths of time, his figure finally disappeared. In the end, he did not dare to take the risk. Compared to his own opportunities, the future of his domain was the most important. Even if no one knew whether the idea would succeed or not, he still had to give it a try. Almost at the same time as Do Lang's figure disappeared, a tremendous repulsive force approached from afar, rapidly spreading towards the interior of the Alpha Origin stage. The first month of the battle for the Divine Sea had passed. After exiting the Alpha Origin stage, Do Lang immediately appeared on the huge platform from before. A white-haired old man beside him could not help but breathe a sigh of relief when he saw him return safely. Although he knew that Do Lang had chosen this time to return, and that there was a high probability that he had gained something, he still could not help but ask, "How was it?" Do Lang responded in a deep voice, "Fortunately, I did not disappoint you." The old man was greatly comforted and nodded repeatedly. "Good, good, good." He then revealed an apologetic expression. "It's just that you've suffered." Do Lang shook his head. "The ancestral land raised me, and the sect taught me. It is my honor to be able to help during the rise and fall of the ancestral land." The old man was even more gratified. "It's good that you think so. Let's go." He had already achieved his goal of bringing Do Lang here, so there was naturally no need to stay any longer. The glory of another domain was ultimately another domain's. The most outstanding Divine Sea expert of this generation of the Chi Sky continent had given up his own opportunities for the future of the ancestral land. Whether this was a blessing or a curse was not clear for the time being, but staying here would only disturb his state of mind. Do Lang followed the old man out, but in the end he could not help but turn back to look in the direction of the Alpha Origin stage's entrance. The entrance had always been there, and there was a huge pillar on both sides. The pillar on the left had less than 2,000 names, while the one on the right had 100 names. Compared to the beginning of the battle for the Divine Sea, the names on the two pillars were less than 500 names. Most of these people had died in the Alpha Origin stage, and only a very small number of them were lucky enough to walk out alive. Now that a month had passed, the temporary top 100 list had been released. Do Lang could not help but be startled for a moment, and his figure paused. The old man sensed something and turned around. "What's wrong?" Do Lang was stunned. "I saw the name of a friend," and the old man smiled. "Oh, did you make friends there?" Do Lang didn't know if the two of them could be considered friends, but they could be considered friends for the time being. After all, although they had been together for less than a month, they had helped each other during this period, and in the end, they even drank and chatted happily. Barely. They could be considered to have formed some friendship. That person is on the right pillar? The old man asked. Dou Lang should not have had such a big reaction just by seeing the name of a friend. It must be the name that appeared on the pillar on the right that made Dou Lang so moved. Du Lang nodded. Which one? What's your ranking? The old man's interest was piqued. Being able to be on the right pillar for the time being did not mean that they would be able to stay there forever. However, this undoubtedly meant that they did indeed have the ability to fight for opportunities. Moreover, those who were on the right pillar now all had their own gains. In the competition between geniuses from various great domains, if they had any gains at this stage, it meant their background was extraordinary, at least surpassing that of most people. If such a person could come out alive, they would be someone worth making friends with. The one ranked 11th. Dou Tian stared at the pillar on the right side of the door in a daze. The line of golden words on the 11th position was there. 9 Heavens Realm, Louis. This time, it was the old man's turn to be stunned. It's him. It shouldn't be. If he remembered correctly, this boy should only be an 8th Order Divine Sea Cultivator. Even if he had some ability and was qualified to participate in the Divine Sea battle, it shouldn't have been possible for him to achieve such a high ranking at this stage. When the door to the Alpha Origin realm opened, Louis had left relatively late, so his cultivation had been noticed by many masters and they had remembered the name Liu Ye from the 9 Heavens. The old man was one of them. At that time, he had thought that this little guy from the 9 Heavens realm might not be able to survive for long. But now, it seemed that he had misjudged him. Du Lang also had a look of disbelief on his face. That shouldn't be, and when he met Liu Yi was already mining spirit jades in the mine. Over the next 20 days or so, the two of them were almost inseparable, and there was no battle between them. So, what was going on with this ranking? It was impossible for two people to have the same name. Even if their names were the same, the realm they came from would be different. Therefore, Du Lang was certain that the person ranked 11th was the Liu Ye he met in the Spirit Jade Lode. Could it be that he had killed a lot of people before meeting Du Lang? So, even if he didn't find anything in the next 20 days, he could still rank 11th? While the old man and young man from the Chi Sky continent were in shock, a great uproar had also set off on the platform. Almost all the masters had noticed the existence of Liu Ye from the 9 Heavens realm, and all of them were in disbelief. At that time, too many people had paid attention to Liu Ye's cultivation. Even if they hadn't noticed him at the time, Yang Qing's subsequent action of throwing the dragon bead into the treasure pond had attracted everyone's attention. It could be said that even the monstrous geniuses from top realms didn't pay as much attention as Liu Yi because everyone wanted to know when he would die. If Yang Qing died in the treasure pond, if Yang Qing died, the dragon bead wouldn't be able to be retrieved. How could the top realms not be interested in such a 9-star treasure? This time, they weren't prepared enough. Regardless of whether Yang Qing won or lost, no one would be able to take the dragon bead away. However, the next 100 years would be an opportunity. When the top realms prepared their bets, it would be time for them to fish the dragon bead out of the treasure pond. It could be said that even the monstrous geniuses from top realms didn't pay as much attention as Liu Yi because everyone wanted to know when he would die. If he died, the dragon bead that Yang Qing threw into the treasure pond wouldn't be retrieved. How could the top realms not be interested in such a 9-star treasure? This time, they weren't prepared enough. Regardless of whether Yang Qing won or lost, no one would be able to take the dragon bead away. However, the next 100 years would be an opportunity. When the top realms prepared their bets, it would be time for them to fish the dragon bead out of the treasure pond. Therefore, from the beginning to the end, many masters had been paying attention to the changes in Liu Ye's name. If he died or voluntarily withdrew, his name would disappear from the pillar on the left. Now, his name had indeed disappeared from the pillar on the left, but it had run to the right and was temporarily ranked 11th. This was too inconceivable. Looking at the 100 people on the right pillar, the top 60 were almost all taken by those from the top realms. Liu Ye's name from top to bottom, which one of them did not come from a top realm? Only he was like a sheep caught in a pack of hungry wolves. Only after the 60th place would there be cultivators who didn't come from top realms. From this point alone, it could be seen that the foundations of cultivators from different realms were also very different. If it was just one case, it wouldn't mean anything, but when a large group of people emerged together, it reflected the difference brought about by different realms. It was already a fact that Lu Ye was temporarily ranked 11th in the Nine Heavens realm. Many experts could only wonder about one thing. How many Alpha Origin kills did he obtain in the past month? In a month, less than 500 Divine Sea experts had been eliminated. If one wanted to be ranked 11th at this stage, they would need at least 5 or 6 Alpha Origin kills. This was very inconceivable. Although those who were temporarily ranked in the top 100 might not necessarily have the last laugh, especially those who were ranked at the top, they would inevitably be targeted in the end. But based on the pattern of the previous Divine Sea battles, he only needed to find a place to hide for the rest of the time. When the 3-month deadline was up, he was very likely to safely emerge victorious. No wonder that expert dared to bet such a precious treasure. As expected, he had great confidence in his juniors. Somewhere on the platform, several experts from top realms were gathered together. They had all participated in the Divine Sea battles before, but that was many years ago, so they were naturally very clear about the methods involved. Lu Ye's ranking surprised them, but that was all. They were watching from the outside and no one knew what was going on inside. No matter what Lu Ye's ranking was now, in their view, there was some element of luck involved. They were more concerned about another group of existences. An old man with the demeanor of an immortal said, "The blood race has indeed made a move. Almost all the people ranked between 70 and 90 are their people." A burly man sneered, "When has the blood race not made a move? Even if they come from different realms, they are of the same origin and have a special method of communication. It's very easy for them to gather together. In the early stages of the Divine Sea battles, they naturally have the advantage in numbers. It's a pity that the human race can't imitate this method of communication. Otherwise, we could completely counter it. That's the ability of their bloodline. How can the human race imitate it? Not to mention the ability of their bloodline, even ordinary communication methods are greatly reduced in the environment of the Alpha Origin stage. It wasn't that they hadn't thought of gathering people in the early stages to eliminate the blood race cultivators, but in the Alpha Origin stage, ordinary communication methods were very ineffective, and it was very difficult to gather people together. The blood race was different. They could easily gather together with the special ability of their bloodline. As a result, wherever they went, no one would be able to stop them, and they would often establish a great advantage in the early stages of the Divine Sea battles. And once this advantage was established, it would be very difficult to erase it. Therefore, the blood race always occupied a large portion of the final victors of the Divine Sea battle. They were also the most troublesome opponents for the human race in the various top realms. Even the cultivators from the top realms would find it difficult to survive if they were besieged by the blood race in the early stages. No matter how strong their foundations were, it was ultimately difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. However, there was also a drawback to the blood race's strategy. Too many people gathered in the early stages, and the spoils were difficult to divide, so their general ranking wasn't high. However, it was currently the best time for the blood race cultivators to raise their rankings. Large numbers of cultivators would be drawn towards the center of the Alpha Origin stage, and the blood race only needed to intercept them along the way. It would be very easy for them to reap the rewards. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.